Greetings, it's been a little while since I cracked out the video here in my lovely Arsenal themed summer house and did a video on Arsenal women. And one of the advantages or the bonuses of doing this in the summer house is you get the lovely sounds of nature around you. So I will be accompanied by a bit of a bird chorus outside, which hopefully adds to the experience rather than detracts from it. But it being the international break, I just wanted to broach questions we sometimes get in our comments section around some of the questions that we ask for Jonas Eidevall, the Arsenal coach, in press conferences, both post-match and pre-match. And I hope that this doesn't come across as defensive, which I don't think it will. And I definitely don't want it to come across as too meta. I think I might fail on that second one, though. It is a little bit meta, but just in the spirit of openness, but also talking a little bit about the way we do content on Arsenal women here at Arseblog News, and particularly where we fit into the wider ecosystem of Arsenal women and women's football coverage. So when we talk to Jonas Eidevall, which we have the opportunity to do quite a lot, and we take it on every single occasion, it's important that we do that because, you know, certainly I've seen my role as kind of a correspondent, much in the way that like a local newspaper might have been a football club correspondent 20, 30, a few years ago, a few decades ago maybe, and that means going to every press conference, taking, first of all, every opportunity to ask questions of the manager, in terms of, I guess, holding them to account, but also we want to ask the questions that you, as supporters of the club and as readers of the site, want answered. So it's very important that we do that, but also so that we can build up an idea of, I guess, how the coach works, how he thinks, how he ticks, how he talks, what he answers, what he doesn't answer, and then to try and relay that to our readers and to supporters, and really act as that, I guess, that conduit between the club and the supporters. So it's important that we do that, and that's not just achieved through the questions that we ask. And I'll come on to this later because there are other people there that ask other things. But we try to pick up the coach usually on points of detail. Now, first of all, I think we should kind of distinguish between the pre-match and the post-match opportunities that we get to speak to Jonas Eidevall. Now, in the pre-match press conferences, there is a lot more room to pick up on wider points. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago when we asked at the end of the transfer window whether Arsenal need a recruitment review, for example, having had a couple of transfer windows now where, by the manager's admission, Arsenal haven't got everything they wanted in the market. And by the way, that's another symptom of being at every press conference. We hear everything he says publicly in those press conferences. So we know, not necessarily in response to our questions specifically, that Jonas has felt in the last two transfer windows he hasn't got everything that he wanted. So we asked that question about, is there a need for a recruitment review? And that's much easier to do in a pre-match press conference where there's a little bit more space for wider subjects. Post-match, we generally ask on points of detail, usually tactical detail, starting lineup, maybe formation, which actually became a subject probably for the first time in the last couple of games, but I'll come on to that really in a minute. The first reason we do that on the kind of tactical detail is, first of all, it just serves one of our central pieces of content, which is, after the weekend WSL game, we usually do like a bit of a tactical breakdown of the game. Now, we don't do match reports because we don't really think that they're worthwhile in the space that we operate in. First of all, there are lots of other more generalist outlets who do that anyway. And second of all of the matches are on, all of the highlights are on. And really the audience that we're serving, not solely, but probably our target specific audience is aficionados, right? People who watch all of the games pretty much. The sort of people who's, like me, whose weekends are ruined when we lose at Manchester City, who feel emotional about that. That's the kind of person I think that we're catering for. So for me, a generalist match report probably doesn't really serve that audience. That's more of a generalist audience, and there are there's lots of outlets that do that and that do that very well. But that's I don't think that's solely who we're for. I think we're for the people who really want the detail. I think in this day and age, the match report might be someone who didn't see the match, wants to catch up vaguely on what happened, whereas I think the audience we largely have on Arseblog News are people who watch all of the matches, who know what happens in all of the matches, and probably want a little bit more detail. And I think we as a site can provide that because we're at all of the Arsenal games. And again, that means that we see what happens in all of the games. So for us, it's not enough really to say that Arsenal played a back three against Manchester City, which they've not done before. We're interested in why did they play a back three? Why did it work? Why did it not work? Where did it not work? And so it's really the first point is it just serves that piece of content. So we don't do the match report, but we pick up on something quite detailed and specific. And so that is why, one of the reasons anyway, we will ask quite detailed tactical questions of Jonas Eidevall. The second reason for that is, I guess, and I've touched on it a little bit there, about where we fit as Arseblog News into the wider kind of ecosystem of women's football coverage. Now, this is only something that we've had to consider for the last couple of years, because for a long time we were the only people, well, not the only people there, but there weren't many people there covering these games. Now, most of the major UK outlets have women's football correspondents. That means that there is very, very welcome, like a generalist. I hope that doesn't sound critical, because it's not, because there absolutely is a generalist audience, and for too long it hasn't been served. And we used to try and serve it, but we don't really anymore, because the Guardian, the Telegraph, the Times, the Mail are all doing that. Goal are doing that. Like Reach are now doing that. So we don't really see the need to compete in that space and kind of ask those more generalist questions, or ask those more overview, 1,000-foot view questions like, what does this result do to the title race, and are you concerned about the title race, and things like that, because I already know that those questions are likely to be asked in the press conference after I've asked my questions, our questions. So one of the things I've had to think about, or we've had to think about since, we've had fuller press boxes at WSL games, at Arsenal games, is where do we fit as Arseblog News into this wider sphere of coverage? And so one of the things we have to think about is, well, what's our USP? Our USP is that we're at every Arsenal game and we're at every Arsenal press conference. So we have the opportunity to really make observations based on all of that knowledge. And that means our USP is detail. That's what we can really, really pick up on. And that's what we have the opportunity to really pick up on when we speak to the manager. So really, when I ask my questions, and Arsenal usually give me the opportunity to go first in the press conferences, which we really appreciate, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm going to pick Jonas up on the detail, because I know that after me, the other questions are probably going to be covered. And I usually get 2 questions. And again, I'm really, really grateful for that, because not everyone always gets that. So because we're at every game, we get treated well by the club. We do. We get treated well by Arsenal because of that. And they don't have to do that. We don't pay money for that. It's because we're at every game. And so what we're really looking for is detail. And again, so when we cover why, Arsenal playing a back three, I want to know why Arsenal played a back three. And in the case of the Manchester City game, because it's the most recent example, I don't think it really worked. Why didn't it work? And so those are the people that we're really catering for in our audience. And it would make no sense really for the Guardian or the Times or anyone else to really do that, because that's much more detailed. Whereas our audience, I think is much more engaged, lives Arsenal day to day, and wants that level of detail. So it's also about where we fit into the wider ecosystem of women's football coverage. But the third reason, and I think probably the most important reason from the perspective of journalistic rigour, is I want to pick up the onus on things that he is tangibly responsible for. And for me, that most naturally follows that it's things like tactics, team selection, and things like that. That doesn't mean we're not open to asking other questions or asking questions about soft factors or things like that. But usually, when you're talking to the manager, I think talking to the manager, I want to pick him up on the things that he is absolutely responsible for. And the game plan, the team selection, the tactics, what were the things you identified? Those to me are the things that he is tangibly responsible for. And that's why I want to ask those questions as well. So there's really three main reasons we do it the way we do. And that's to serve the content that we provide, to serve the audience that we are really kind of tailoring to. And I think something I learned a couple of years ago was not for us to chase a casual audience, because that's not who we have. People who spend their time watching videos like this, reading articles like the ones we do, listening to our podcasts, they are not casual consumers. So, you know, our numbers are good. Our audience is really, really strong. There is a reason that our site is able to pay for an Arsenal women correspondent. That's because we're commercially successful, because we have a big readership. We don't quite have the same readership as The Guardian or The Telegraph or The Times, but what we have is a very engaged audience. And that's who we're really, really speaking to. And I think the other thing I've learned over time as well is actually the way you reel in the more casual audience is by showing your own enthusiasm and showing your USP, which is detail, which is being at all of the press conferences and all of the games. And I think sometimes, and look, this is the part where I don't want to sound defensive, we get some criticism in the comments section, which is absolutely fine. And look, I'm a big believer that in all feedback, a hint of truth. But sometimes, particularly after a tricky result, you know, people will accuse us of softballing or asking the softer questions. And I understand that. I do think there's an element that after Arsenal don't win, what a lot of people want to hear is for me to say, Jonas or whoever the coach is, why are you such an idiot? And for him to spend 5 minutes saying, thanks, Tim, I'm an idiot and I got everything wrong today because of this. And that's just, you don't get a response out of people when you ask questions like that. And when I did kind of investigator training many years ago, we were taught, you know, about it's a tricky balance sometimes between establishing a rapport with the person that you're questioning, but also keeping a kind of critical distance at the same time. And you can't afford to be too emotive when you do that, and then you get a better quality of answer and a better detail of answer if you focus on detail. And that's also how coaches think. Even in the immediate aftermath of games, they are thinking analytically, they are thinking of detail. And in my experience, if you ask them on points of detail, they're much more receptive, in my view anyway. And people might still disagree with that, and that's fine. But that's why we ask the questions we do and how we frame what we do. And I hope that wasn't too meta. And that at least kind of shows you our thinking and where we stand, because we take it very seriously that we get to speak to the manager a couple of times a week. And like I said, it's really important to us that we ask the questions and try and satisfy some of those curiosities that you, as kind of very engaged fans, have. And we hope that we do that. But I just wanted to really set the scene about, you know, how we do that and why we do that.